So welcome, Paul. I know well. Paul helped me put in an employee wellbeing programme here at the bank quite a number of years ago. Paul is the Managing Director of ICAS MENA. Welcome, Paul, and if you'd like to introduce yourself, that would be great.
Hi, yes, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks, Nicola. So yes, ICAS MENA is the local operation of ICAS International. We're a global provider of employee assistance programs. We're one of the top 4 global companies delivering EAPs. And I came here 11 years ago now to set up the EAP operation for ICAS, initially in the Middle East, but we now support just over 160 corporate clients over 18 countries across the MENA region, and MBF was the second client of ours 10 years ago.
Okay, thanks very much, panelists. And again, I apologise for being slightly absent for that part. Just for everybody joining us, as well as the polls, we have a Q&A session planned towards the end of the webinar. So in case questions come up whilst we're going through our discussion, then please feel free to share them. Hopefully you can find the Q&A tab, which is above the polling tab, and you can put in any questions there that you might have for any of our panelists, and we'll come to those at the end. Okay, so to start the session, I'd like to start by talking to you, Paul, if I may, and just get you to share some of your experiences, I guess, of going through the pandemic. So I guess, can you tell us, in your experience, how employee wellness has been impacted because of COVID, and what effect has that had on motivation and engagement?
Yeah, sure. I mean, great question to start with. I think from our experience, what we saw was COVID had a pretty massive impact on individuals' mental and physical well-being. We know even before COVID, if we look at our sort of mental well-being, 1 in 4 of us will experience a mental health issue in our lifetime. If we put that into a work context, it's roughly about 1 in 6. And I think what we saw with COVID was it came out of the blue. So it's, whilst our human body is designed to experience and manage and deal with stress, it's primarily designed around our acute stress responses. So I think what we saw with COVID, in terms of dealing with stress, generally we'll either go into a fight or flight mode. And I think it was just human nature, going through COVID, certainly through the majority of last year, 2020, was that we were all in sort of fight mode, which is fine in terms of, for a short period of time. So I think what we certainly saw in terms of employees engaging with our EAP, we saw a 3-fold increase in the volume of calls coming into our EAP last year. And we saw, unfortunately, stress, anxiety, depression, being the sort of key factors for people accessing the EAP for support. So they were the top 3 presenting issues. I would add to that stress, anxiety, depression prior to COVID were still problems that we were experiencing in this region. So I think it hasn't necessarily changed the dynamics of what we experience here. I think the volumes clearly changed. So I think that clearly COVID has driven that increase in stress, anxiety, and depression that we have to manage. Globally, we saw an increase in musculoskeletal conditions, so neck, back pains. If I think of myself here, I still work from home at the moment, so I'm in the spare bedroom. I've got a reasonable workstation, but I'm pretty much sat here most of the time. So you don't necessarily have the same breaks that you might have, like we would have had, when we're sort of working in a normal sort of work environment. I think what we also know is, data that we've seen over a number of years now is suggesting that mental health is having a bigger impact on the younger age grouping. So, when we're looking at, our employees now in the sort of 20s and 30 age categories, the millennials, the Generation Zs, then we know that they're impacted more by the emotional, psychological, and mental health issues that they're having to deal with. I think in terms of motivation and engagement, well, I think 2020, I think most employers and employees coped with it tremendously well. I don't think we had any option. We had to deal with it. I think what employers did quite effectively was, worked very hard at engaging with what became remote workers. So that was, it was a new challenge they had to deal with. But to some degree, as I say, we were left with little alternative. So it's something we had to do as employers. And we had to do that to ensure business continuity. So with with technology, having regular dialogue with our remote workers was all part of maintaining the engagement and keeping the motivation. I think management of remote workers, certainly during 2020, was sort of more micromanagement in terms of keeping very close to our employees. And employers were more comfortable around allowing much greater flexibility. And again, I think possibly to some degree, we had little option other than to do that. And I think the challenge now going into 2020 is, can we continue supporting that type of, sort of work environment? And I think the challenge is that, sustaining that level of engagement, support, longer term is going to be the challenge. Some companies will do it very well. I think some companies will find it more of a challenge. We're already seeing signs coming, people engaging with the EAP in terms of some of the remote workers now are feeling more disengaged with the workplace and the employers and the company. Sorry, the employer. Sorry, yeah, and the company. And I think that's going to be a challenge. And I think what may have happened is that the sort of focus from a business perspective on ensuring that managers, line managers, keep engaged with those remote workers. I think possibly the foot's been taken off the pedal slightly. So I think that's something we need to be very mindful of. And
sorry, Paul, can I just,
yes,
I'm going to interrupt because I just want to follow up. I guess you've worked with a lot of organisations. So during COVID, I guess you saw organisations obviously trying to balance operating with keeping people safe. I think to give perhaps some practical insights to the business leaders and owners participating today, what do you think worked well? We're not out of the pandemic, sadly. So what operating models did you see that perhaps you could share in terms of managing that balance between keeping the business going and open, but also protecting people, making sure they're safe?
Well, as I say, last year I think we were entirely in working within a pretty much 100% remote working environment. I think what we're seeing now is the hybrid, where there are still those that are working and pretty much remotely. I think the majority of us will probably be within the middle sector of sort of hybrid working, remote and office based. So I think the challenge and what we're seeing with organisation now is you have to have a slightly different focus on each of those populations because their needs are quite different. So the remote worker, the hybrid worker sat in the middle, remote and office based. And then obviously there are some businesses where there are roles that require an individual to be in the workplace full time. So I think it's having the ability to and the flexibility to manage 3 different employee segments. And I think that's the challenge for any business moving forward. Yeah.
Thank you. Just sort of moving on now, hopefully, businesses are starting to open up, the market's starting to improve. So businesses will be looking perhaps to start to bring more employees in to their business and possibly even into the workplace. How do you think that sort of recruitment would be impacted, and what concerns do you think potential candidates would have about sort of workplace and remote working, issues, and what can businesses do to make sure they can still attract good talent?
Again, another good question. I think aside from the sort of hybrid working, I think we have to recognise that the difference now across the working population. I'm from the old school era in terms of my experience of many years of being an employee. I think we have to recognise the difference now in terms of millennials and Generation Z in the work environment. They are quite different. They're a lot more inclined to technology and are more comfortable with technology. But I think they have a different approach to work. And I think historically, where we've always historically tried to balance seeing work and life, our home life, our lifestyle, and we've tried to balance the two. And I think what you now see with the younger age employees is they don't see a differentiator. It's work life, and the two are just merged. And I think what they're clearly looking for is flexibility within the workplace. So it's an expectation. So I think businesses today have to be very much aware of that. And I think again, if you look at the 20 to 30 up to 40 age category, when you think their work experience has come through sort of economic boom and then recession and now COVID. So again, I think they put greater focus on health and safety and their health and well-being. And I think that has to be a key focus in any business today. And I always use the phrase now that employee well-being is a business need. It's not a nice to have. You won't perform at the optimum as a business. You won't be driving your business successfully without having a good, robust well-being program, whatever that might look like, and they can vary, and a culture within the organization that supports employees. So I think in terms of recruiting and retaining people, I think that's a key thing. Again, sorry, go on.
Sorry, I was just going to follow up. Have you seen then organisations actually starting to struggle to retain or lose good talent, and because they're not prepared to sort of invest in well-being? Are people, particularly as you say, the younger generations, voting with their feet when it comes to sort of well-being?
Yes, basically, and I think we're seeing that not just in this region, that we're seeing that globally. I think businesses just have to be smart enough to recognise, that there is a difference, and it's around engaging with the individuals. We're all different as human beings, and a business today that will be successful will be the one that really can, from an individual employee's perspective, they will feel that business is focused on them as an individual. Whether it's career development, whether it's my own health, well-being, whether it's my safety in the workplace, whether it's my ability to achieve that requirement in terms of my work-life balance, and the organisation that supports all of that for me as an individual is the one that I'll end up working for. And and I think that's what we're seeing globally as well as here. And I think I mentioned technology, but I think millennials, Generation Z, the days, again, if I think back to my time, the days of the thick HR manual in terms of policies and procedures, they've gone.
Yeah.
employees today, they're slicker. They want to be able to see things visually, videos, but very short and succinct. So again, as employees, we have to be mindful of that. And if I was, maybe a 25-year-old today going into work environment that wasn't delivering all of that, then I'm probably not going to stay very long, even if I actually, accept and take the job on. So I think that's quite crucial.
Good. Well, thank you very much, Paul. That's been very interesting and insightful. I'd like to move on, if I can, though, to Andy. So perhaps we can have a look at teams now, Andy, if we can. So I think what's been happening at a sort of team level in terms of COVID, I know you've been doing some research into this. So I think everybody would be very interested perhaps to hear some of the highlights from your research.
Yeah, sure. Both anecdotally and through a sort of survey that I've put out to the market, to clients, just sort of trying to check in and see what has been happening. Some of it's been surprising, some of it's been validating. Yes, we all know it's been stressful, it's been anxious, it's created issues and concerns. In terms of the model for moving forward, 25% of the people who responded to the survey said that they frequently or always worked remotely before the pandemic. 25%. During, it went up to 95%. And then the question about what do you see yourselves doing in the future, 65%, 3/4 of the people said that they think that they will work online frequently or always. So the world of work is definitely changing. Another surprising thing was that actually 35% of people who responded said that it built trust in their teams rather than breaking trust. And that made me think about, sometimes, teams respond to threat in different ways. And some teams are good at circling the wagons and, pitching in, and everyone's in this together and creating that kind of Dunkirk spirit, as we say in the UK. That ability to fight. And I think the teams that struggled are the ones that perhaps before were papering over cracks and like ignoring some of the things. It's not so bad. We'll let that slide. We're not going to deal with that. We're not courageous enough to fix the little problems. But then as soon as you apply pressure, it's like putting an egg in a vice. It'll crack really, really quickly. So I think it's been an interesting time for teams. But overall, it's been. The trend is fear, anxiety. We don't like change. We're not wired for change as human beings. And so, I think it's been difficult for a lot of people, and for everything that we've just been hearing about in terms of sort of those sort of anxiety and wellness and, physical as well as mental issues that, have definitely surfaced.
Thanks, Andy. I think given the sort of participants we've got, many of them business leaders and business owners, so therefore team leaders by default, I guess they would be very interested in what advice you've got for them in terms of, I guess, the issues that they might be facing, and what can they learn, and how do they go forward to really effectively lead and manage their teams.
Yeah, sure. I think there's a couple of things here. One of the key things, as Paul was saying, is work-life, right? We all thought there was a work-life or not, a work-life balance. It's kind of grey, and it's no longer work over here and life over here. That's the first thing to notice, that suddenly you are in people's lives. They're at home in their living rooms with their children behind them, and all that kind of stuff's going on. What's going on for them? Find out. Number one, the first thing, how is it landing with everybody? Have you asked the question? Either as a group or one-to-one, what's really happening? And you need to play the role of kind of like a dog sled driver who needs to kind of pull and let go on the reins, individually here and there, flexibly with everyone on the team. It's a greater skill as a manager. That's probably the first thing, is find out what's going on for everybody. Have you asked the question? Are you being flexible? Are you modeling the behavior yourself? Are you admitting to everyone, listen, I'm scared, I'm anxious, I'm worried about the future, my job, all that kind of thing? Because then it becomes okay to talk about it. Everyone follows the leader. So if you're the team leader, lead the way, show by example that it's okay to talk about this kind of stuff, tap into what's going on and do what you can to help people out. It'll increase their loyalty, it'll increase their desire to do work. The second thing is also, I love the book, The Truth About Employee Engagement by Pat Lencioni, and it really resonates at the moment when he talks about the 3 signs or the 3 major causes of disengaged workforces being anonymity, that people feel anonymous, they feel unrecognized, unthanked, that no one cares about them. The second thing is immeasurability, to measure what's happening. Do they have clear goals, targets? Do they know when they're being successful or not? Especially now, what does successful look like for teams now? Is it just about your numbers and your KPIs, or is it also about your wellness and your health as a team? And that's suddenly become more important. And then the third thing is irrelevance. Why are we doing what we're doing? What do we do? We're all just in the trenches firefighting this pandemic. Don't forget to focus on why we're here in the first place. And all of this is stuff you should be doing anyway. It's not just pandemic related, but is what I'm doing making a difference, especially with engaging younger people who really want meaning and impact and purpose to be front and center in their reason for getting up and going to work. And it's not about earning money, it's about knowing that what you are doing makes an impact on other people's lives in a positive way. Again, we're social animals, we like to know that we're helping other people. So those 3 things: anonymity, irrelevance, and immeasurability, focus on those.
Thanks, Andy. I think finally, it'd be interesting to hear from you looking forward. So what do you think the, future looks like, considering, employee wellness and engagement, motivation?
I'm not a fortune teller, I can't tell the future, but I think the point is that it can go either way. You have an opportunity to control that as best you can. I think it's Stephen Covey's 7 habits of effective people, the circle of influence and the circle of concern. It's an interesting exercise to think about what can you control? How much can you be the master of your future? I think the first thing is change is going to be ever present. If it's not a pandemic, it'll be something else. And I think that good teams are the ones who have learned a lot and have seen the opportunity that this oddly this has presented to learn about flexibility and agility and getting through difficult times, staying together as a team, being honest about what's going on, constantly checking in at a team level and individually. How's it all going? What do we need to do? The whole kind of agile sprint, to try and fix what's happening. But be the master as best you can. Accept some things are going to be out of your control, but don't be a rabbit in the headlights. And what I think will happen is, yes, there will always be teams that don't perform and have issues and challenges and conflict, and that's why people like me exist. But good teams are the ones that will consciously and intentionally design what's okay and what's not okay. There's a really, really strong indicator of team health and success called if-then thinking. If this happens, then we will do that. Special forces use it all the time. Anticipate actions on this happening. It's a really healthy habit to get into, because then when it does, you're kind of prepared and you know what to do. And again, going back to just engaging and having the right conversations with your people so that they're on board, that they feel that they belong there, they have a sense of belonging, and therefore they make this conscious choice, because teamwork is about choice, right? The only team you don't choose is your family, and everything else in life that you do in teams is choice. And they can walk away, so if you've got people working for you, you want them to choose not only just to turn up and take the paycheck, but to do the best work that they've ever done. And so good teams that are going to survive this kind of thing and thrive and actually continue to fight are going to be the ones that can really speak to that in people's lives.
Thank you, Andy. I've made a few notes for myself from that, so very useful stuff there. So thank you very much, and we'll come back to you in the Q&A. Talking of Q&A, so don't forget, if you want to either chat in or use the Q&A fields to put in your questions, we'll come back to those at the end. So do feel free to do that while the webinar's ongoing. Bobby. So I'm sorry, I missed your introduction. So hello. So very nice to meet you and welcome. I guess with you, I wanted to move on to, again, a bit bit forward looking, future looking. But firstly, perhaps we've talked a lot, I guess, about sort of team leaders and employees. But what about the top team, the C-suite? So how important is it that that top team are really on board with well-being initiatives? And I guess, how do you convince them that they're going to get the bang for their buck? So, you know, this inevitable question about what it's worth. Yes, it's going to cost something. They're going to see that, but some of the benefits can be quite intangible. So what advice have you got for our, I guess, our guests today around that?
So, just before I answer that exact question, I always think it's really useful to frame what we mean by workplace well-being, because sometimes people get a little bit confused about what that is, and they get it confused with workplace wellness, and they are two slightly different things. So when we're talking about well-being, we're talking about the whole experience that you have at work, how satisfied or engaged you are, how much you're enjoying your role, how you get on with your teammates, as well as are you able to be a healthy and sort of well looked after person. Whereas wellness tends to focus just on that sort of physical mental health piece. So when we're talking about well-being, we're talking about the interplay between employee well-being and the well-being of the actual organization and how that performs. And so that kind of tees up quite nicely why it's super important that the C-suite is not only on board, but they're actually driving it, and they're taking a really proactive role in measuring it and making sure that it is delivering ROI and also VOI, value on investment, in terms of those less tangible factors. Simply, without this senior impetus, well-being in the workplace will always struggle to reach its true value. It has got to be something that the team at the top truly believe can help drive the performance and contribution of every employee, but in turn the performance of the entire organization. And really, that is the shift. It's the shift from a mentality of thinking this is a cost, something we have to as a business endure and write off as a cost, to thinking about it as an investment that is manageable and demonstrable. And it absolutely is. And the deeper we get into wellbeing science, the easier or the more tools that are becoming available for us to measure some of those factors. Some of them often a little bit intangible, things like productivity and satisfaction and engagement. We can kind of measure them, but sometimes it's quite difficult to put exact numbers on things. And other things we can start to really measure. You know, a lot of companies tie it to their bottom line. We know that the stock market performance of companies with high well-being outperforms non-high well-being companies by 2 to 3%, which is quite significant return. So yeah, so for me, it's about, definitely they have to be on board, they have to be driving it, they have to be seeing it as a strategic imperative to the success and growth of their company.
Thanks very much, Bobby. I guess one of the things that's interesting to me is your job title. Yeah, so Founder and Chief Wellbeing Officer. So I think here at the bank, I don't know about the other panelists, we've still got fairly traditional in HR job titles. So I guess, what do you think in terms of the role of HR going forward? How do you think the role of HR training and related functions is going to change?
Yeah, this is a great question, and actually it's already happening, as I'm sure you're well aware, particularly over in the US and the UK, Australia to a degree. I think there's going to be a few things that the HR role is going to have to keep up with in terms of just responding to COVID and the changes that has accelerated. So obviously the adjustment to the remote work. I think we're going to see some government regulation and change and compliance around those things that HR professionals are going to have to be aware of and inform their employees. I think we're also going to see changes in how we manage performance and what performance management actually means to us. And does that mean, back to some of the work that Andy does, there's a big place for teams in performance that we kind of overlook, and we're stuck a little bit on those traditional manager down to subordinate kind of performance reviews. And there's a big scope now saying that should be broadened out, and we should be looking at the role of teams in that. So I think that a sort of redesign of performance management is going to be pretty big. I also think, and this is where really well-being comes in, I think there's going to be a big change in employee benefits. And one of the big changes, and you mentioned my title, Chief Wellbeing Officer, why have I chosen that title? Well, it's quite a new title, and it's quite a new position on a lot of boards around the world, and now thinking, right, let's extend well-being. The challenge has always been with well-being is that it has been perceived, or it's been presented to employers and employees as an employee benefit, but actually that undermines the whole point of it. And it's kind of like, if my own well-being is a benefit, then you can take it away from me at any time. It's sort of something that the company is in control of, which is not a great message to your employees. And so what we're seeing is companies are taking well-being out of the HR space, out of the company benefits space, and they're integrating it at that strategic top level as an umbrella function within the organization to drive strategic performance, to drive culture, etc. So I think that the role of HR will lose a bit of that well-being element, and it will move towards that more umbrella role, and I think that the type of benefits that organizations are going to offer through the traditional benefits route of HR are also going to change, as the other panelists have already mentioned. You know, money isn't the thing that everybody's after now. They're after other factors, other benefits. So I see that changing as well.
Thanks, Bobby. I guess moving on, I just want to ask you about, you know, we hope most businesses do well, but those businesses that are struggling or still struggling, really just to keep going, how do they, you know, if things are improving and you're doing well, it starts to be a lot easier, obviously, to sort of motivate people, keep morale high. But when you're struggling and really, you know, you can't keep the lights on anymore, how do business leaders, managers deal with that situation?
Absolutely. And let's be honest, the fallout of COVID is going to last many, many years for some businesses. It's going to take them a very long time to recover, and they're going to perch precariously on that threshold for potentially years to come. The answer to this question is in the question, which is so beautiful, which is basically engage your employees in helping to rescue your business. In well-being science, there is little that drives engagement more than a sense of purpose, and Andy's already alluded to that. And if you can get your employees and rally behind, and it doesn't need to be pitched to them like, if we don't fix this, we're all going to be out of a job and we're going to have to switch the lights off, but it can be pitched to them as, look, this situation has occurred, it was completely beyond our control, it's caused complete chaos. But it's an opportunity for us to reinvent ourselves. It's an opportunity for us to say, what are we still doing that actually just isn't serving us? It's just weighing us down, and it's old habits that are dying hard. How can we innovate away from those to become more agile, more human-centric, more well-being-centric? How can we attract the best talent to fuel innovation of the future, and really engage very openly your employees in that mission, and giving them that real sense of purpose, that ability to add true meaningful value, be recognized for it, is a really, really exciting way that they can support that. And I think for a very long time, the C-suite and the sort of layer below that have kind of felt like they've had to have all of the answers. And what this situation has proven is that nobody has all of the answers. You can't possibly have all of the answers, and the complexities that exist downstream in businesses are vast and numerous, and you're not expected to know them. And so I think what's going to happen is we're going to see some trust and some autonomy moving down through the hierarchy, and sending answers back up through the hierarchy to the upper echelons to then make informed strategic decisions. But engage your team and get as many brains on that process as you possibly can. This is such an opportunity for companies, even when it feels like it's a big threat and a real challenge. It really is an opportunity to pivot and to do some really exciting and reinvent yourself, ready for the future.
Thank you very much, Bobby. I'm conscious of time, and we've had quite a few questions come in, so I'd like to leave enough time for those. So I guess what I'd like to say now, just kind of to wrap up, I mean, firstly, thank you very, very much, Paul, Andy, Bobby, for sharing your insights in terms of engagement, wellness and teamwork. It's very clear organisations can learn an awful lot from the last 18 months. I think I took out of it, COVID's been stressful, but the world of work is changing and will continue to change, whether or not there's a pandemic or something else. Our younger generations in particular, but all our employees now are expecting, well-being to be part of being at work. It's not a nice to have. Motivating and purposeful and positive work is really important, and engaging our teams in that, and it needs to be led from the top. So I think some very interesting discussions that we've had. What I'd like to do now, we've had quite a lot of questions, so I will try to address them to the most relevant person. I think you could all answer all of them. I'm going to start with Paul. A very specific question that's come in. Somebody said, particularly industries that are dealing sort of day to day with, I'm going to say, sort of retail public, so whether that's hospitality, aviation, what do you recommend in terms of their well-being approach? They want to look at not only the well-being of their employees, but the well-being of their customers as well. And do you recommend that you organise so you have sort of one team who are looking at both employees and customers? Or do you recommend they need a different approach? So you have somebody looking at employees' well-being and you have a separate team looking at customer well-being. What's the interesting question, I think, Paul?
Very interesting question. I think I'd probably say not necessarily see the two as separate. If you have a focused, healthy, engaged employee, then that will come across in terms of what you do in terms of looking after your customers. And I've always taken that view. If I go to a restaurant, a big part of my experience is the people that are going to be serving me in the restaurant, the environment in the restaurant. And if that's not right, then my personal experience isn't right. So I think as a business, you have to start within and looking at your employees, but I wouldn't necessarily see the two things as quite separate. But I think, a focus has to be very much on your employees, because they're the ones that are going to be representing you as in whatever your business is. And that's what the customer experiences. And so that's probably would be my response to that question.
Okay, thank you. Andy, can I ask you this next question? So somebody's asked, can we describe what we think the new competencies for the future world of work might look like?
For individuals working I think it's more about your ability to engage with other people. That's more important. I think self-awareness, what are your strengths and weaknesses, being open to feedback, being able to give feedback, being able to create honesty in the workplace, being able to know how to communicate, to be less overtaken by ego, and to be able to have greater levels of empathy. When I work with teams, I talk about self-awareness, IQ, that sense of awareness of self, EQ, awareness for other people, and trust is built between two people. But increasingly, I would say that you need to have this sort of a third level of awareness, which is almost like systemic around, where you belong in your team. Which I think is really, really powerful concept of tapping into the kind of consciousness of those people around you. Because I think you're going to, over your career, most people who are coming into the job market, now, the jobs haven't yet been created that they will be doing in 5 years. So that flexibility, that being able to transition between job roles, being able to collaborate, skills of collaboration with others, understanding other people, all of those things, which we didn't learn at school. No one sat us down and taught us. I can tell you what the date of the Battle of Hastings is, but a lot of people can't tell you how to actually communicate with somebody. So those, I think, are the most important skills. And, you know, it's up to you. It's your, you know, oh, well, no one's ever taught me. Well, you know, that's partly your fault. You know, go out and find it. Don't just sit there and moan. Be your own advocate. There's enough out there you can learn for free how to do all of this stuff. So I don't think it's an excuse to say, well, it's not my fault. I think, you know, the onus is on everyone to upskill yourself to be, you know, someone desirable in the workplace.
Thanks, Andy. Bobby, I guess an interesting question we've had. So one of our participants has said that over the last 18 months, then I guess more than ever, quite a number of employees will have gone through, you know, a very emotional time. So sadly, people have lost loved ones, or I guess particularly here in the UAE with the large expatriate community, you've got a lot of people who haven't seen family for considerable amount of time. It's 18 months or so since I saw most of my family back in the UK. So the question is, what can managers, team leaders, I guess, Andy, maybe we'll come to you in a minute, but Bobby, what can managers do? What can the executive do to really support people in this situation?
For me, this is absolutely about flexibility, and it's about trusting yourself as a leader to have really honest conversations with your employees and to let them tell you what they need as an individual. I don't feel like this is one of those times we need sweeping policy and procedure things. You know, this is hopefully a relatively temporary situation, and you will get so much more back from an employee if you are able to give them what they need within reason. A 50% pay rise probably isn't on the books, but you know, if they say, is it possible for me to go back to my country for 4 weeks and work remotely, and I will adjust my hours as needed, so that I can spend time with my family, so that I can fulfill that quarantine requirement, and they genuinely believe that that will bring them the peace and the focus that they need. It's better to do that for a short term than it is to just drive and drive and drive as much as you possibly can, because it's the law of diminishing returns. You'll be getting less and less from them. They'll be becoming more demotivated, more disengaged, more focused on things outside of the workplace. So I think it's just about having those one-to-one conversations, really understanding what's troubling those individuals and being as flexible and as reasonable as is absolutely possible. Most people will carry on doing an amazing job for you. That's the thing we have to get to. Most people want to perform, they want to deliver, they want to contribute, and they will do that whether they're sat on the moon or they're sat in front of their desk computer or they're at home. So that would be my advice.
Yeah, and it's quite interesting. So I think before we started, we asked people to contribute to a poll about which were sort of the most impactful aspects that sort of COVID had, and top of that poll, I can see the results now on the side of my screen, was the choices were employee engagement, morale and motivation, health and wellness, or productivity. So I guess everybody that's joined us today, the overwhelming winner of that poll was health and wellness, which I guess is very much, I guess, resonates with what the panelists have all been talking about. So health and wellness was seen as the most important, then morale and motivation, then engagement, and actually employee productivity in last place. So I think that sort of fits very well with what you as panelists have been saying. So I think the audience would tend to agree with you. A final question that came in, quite sort of practical question. Andy, I don't know, perhaps you want to say something about it, perhaps Paul as well. The person who asked the question is looking for what sort of policies and procedures should I have in place, maybe that I didn't have, to really help with bringing a sort of change in terms of well-being engagement. So Andy, do you just want to share any thoughts on that? What can businesses put in place in terms of policies and procedures?
I think the thing that I would say is staying in touch with your employees. Don't just do the annual review. I think Bobby alluded to this. You know, oh yeah, we'll just review them once a year and then, you know, tick box. I know people in close to me who haven't even had an appraisal and have already been given a rating for last year. So what's that say to them? The policy should be short, frequent, weekly check-ins with your people in your team. And you can capture that in some way, but short, sharp. It takes 5 minutes. Have a 5-minute conversation, 10 minutes. Be coach-like, rather than just being the boss. And build that into the way that you manage your team, so you can check in what's working for you, what's scaring you, what's getting in your way, and how can I help you this week? Those simple questions. That can be a 5-minute conversation. So just stay in touch. Avoid letting people be anonymous. It's so important.
Thank you, Andy. Paul, we're almost out of time, but is there anything you just want to add on that, what people can put in place in terms of those policies and procedures?
I not particularly. I mean, I totally agree with what Andy's just said. I hate to say it, Nicola, as a HR person, I'm not a lover of policies and procedures. I'm aware that we have to have them, but I think if most companies are being honest with themselves, they probably don't, in their policies and procedure list, they probably don't have anything about employee well-being. They'll have lots of other things, and I think, as an organization, it's been said earlier, it's got to come culturally down from the top. And so, if you're seriously looking at making, positive change, review all your policies and procedures, make sure that employees are at the heart of that, and make sure you've got something in there that's very clear about what you as an organization means in relation to employee well-being, what it means to you and your organization. And that's the only way you're really going to get employees sort of then engaging with the same objectives of as the business.
Thank you, Paul. It wasn't my question, by the way.
No.
But right, well, thank you. That's all we've got time for, sadly. It's 4 o'clock. I will just let our audience know, in terms of the second poll, we asked you what you'd like a webinar on next, and I guess streets ahead with the most votes was the post-COVID business recovery and growth in the virtual world. So that got most of the votes. On behalf of MBF, I'd like to thank everybody for joining us today. It's been fantastic to have you all with us. Obviously, a very special thank you to Andy, Bobby and Paul, our three fantastic panelists who so graciously, I guess, shared all their knowledge with us today. Also, thank you to, I have lots of colleagues here in the background, the team at MBF, who have made this possible today. So thank you all very much and have a very good afternoon. Thank you. Bye-bye.